Did you go to Home Depot with the intention of buying a hatchet and coming home and murdering your husband?
No. What is it you don't understand, bitch? I don't love you anymore.
May 11th, 2004. Julie Dumbleton couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Bob, their friendly neighborhood batting cage owner, was nowhere to be found. The family had met Bob when they took their kids, Jenna and Jake, to his facility, the upper deck. Over time, Bob became more than just a coach. Bob had taken Jenna under his wing, coaching her softball team, and Jake was helping him rebuild his old Mustang. With his own kids grown and gone, Bob enjoyed having them around. Julie even started working part-time for Bob, handling the office work. It was completely out of character for Bob to miss Jenna's practice. She told her husband Dick that she was going to file a missing persons report. The previous weekend had been Mother's Day. Bob Seaman had just returned from visiting his brother, while Nancy Seaman had spent the holiday with their son Jeff and his wife. When they all got back, Jeff and his wife went inside so they could say hi to his dad. That's when the arguing started. Nancy asked Bob if she could borrow the truck to help their other son, Greg, move his stuff back from college. Greg was graduating and leaving college, but Bob, still fuming over not being invited to the graduation, told Nancy to figure something else out. Jeff and his wife left, leaving Bob and Nancy still arguing. Julie wasn't exactly Nancy's biggest fan. They'd started off cordial, but over the years, friction had built up between them. Bob had purchased an old Mustang, hoping to rebuild it with Greg. Greg was initially enthusiastic, but lost interest after a few months. Nancy, without telling Bob, bought Greg a newer Mustang. That's when Bob started working on the car with Jake instead. Nancy was furious, accusing Bob of abandoning his family for the Dumbletons, and referred to them by her derogatory nickname, the Dumbies. She even stormed over to the Dumbletons' house once, telling Julie that her son Jake would never have the Mustang, and if Julie didn't keep Jake away, she would. Julie started to document her interactions with the family after that. She just had a bad feeling about Nancy, and felt that it might come in handy someday. The tension rose at the most recent Woodward Avenue Dream Cruise, a local parade of classic cars that was a family tradition. Normally, one of Bob's family members would ride with him, but that year no one wanted to go. So Bob offered the ride to the Dumbleton family. Greg was upset, and Nancy, as usual, sided with him. The rift between father and son, husband and wife, and even brother and brother deepened as Greg told his father to choose, him or the Dumbies. Jeff, the older of the two brothers, didn't have a problem with any of this. Maybe it was because he was starting his own life and didn't want the drama. He would spend time with his dad when he could, talking cars and baseball over lunch. Meanwhile, Bob was spending more and more time at the upper deck and growing increasingly frustrated with Nancy's attitude. The strain at home escalated. Bob and Nancy started sleeping in different rooms, Bob in the man cave in the basement and Nancy in the master bedroom upstairs. Their communication devolved into passive-aggressive notes left around the house. Bob felt like a guest in his own home and began neglecting household chores out of spite. Nancy, equally stubborn, refused to do them as well. The garbage piled up, the lawn went unmowed, and appliances needed repairs. It became a standoff, with neither willing to back down. By January 2004, Nancy was dealing with the unexpected death of her mother. She became even more upset, feeling that Bob wasn't making any effort to mend their fractured family in the wake of this tragedy. Bob, on the other hand, confided in his friends that despite feeling bad about the situation, he believed their marriage was headed for divorce. The only thing holding him back was the thought of Nancy getting half of their marital assets. Nancy began telling her kids that Bob had been assaulting her, claiming she was a victim of domestic violence. Jeff's wife immediately urged Nancy to move out and get away from Bob. However, Nancy was hesitant to make such a sudden move, which planted a seed of doubt in Jeff's mind. Despite her claims of fear, Nancy took her time looking for a new place to live. She rejected one condo due to the floor plan, even though it was move-in ready, and chose another that she could decorate herself, carefully selecting paint colors and appliances. For someone supposedly living in fear of domestic abuse, Nancy seemed to be taking her sweet time, further fueling Jeff's doubts. Greg, however, took his mother's side immediately. His father was dead to him now. He'd made his choice. In February 2004, the company that sponsored the girls' softball team received a letter. It claimed that Coach Bob had unnatural motives for coaching little girls and included vague threats about going to the news. The letter was signed, quote, "Someone who knows." Bob confronted Nancy, asking if she had written it, but she denied it and blamed Julie, suggesting that she wanted to make Nancy look bad. At that point, Bob stopped paying the mortgage. This had a ripple effect on Nancy's secret mortgage for the condo, causing the rate to go up. Bob discovered the condo but kept this knowledge to himself. He took some time away to visit his family, and during this trip, something shifted in his perspective. He decided he no longer cared about the assets. In fact, his brother told him that he could claim half of Nancy's assets as well. That would mean he could claim half the equity in the condo if he wanted to. Bob had initially thought that he needed to stay in the marriage for the sake of the kids. But then he reflected on how he had paid for Greg's college and wasn't even invited to the graduation. It seemed Greg was slipping further away, so what was the point? Bob was ready to tell Nancy when he got home on Mother's Day. He was ready for a divorce. Shortly after Mother's Day weekend, the police received the call from Julie reporting Bob missing. When officers arrived at Nancy and Bob's house, Nancy told them she hadn't filed a missing persons report and didn't know who did. She explained that Bob often left home without telling anyone and had just returned from a trip without informing the family. She added that he was having a midlife crisis and was trying to find himself. The police left, seemingly satisfied with her explanation. Later that night, the police received another missing persons report, this time from Bob's brother. They returned to the house, but it was late and they didn't find anything suspicious when they looked through the windows. Detectives were assigned to the case, and they were troubled by the two separate missing persons reports. They decided to return to the house once more. This time, Nancy invited them in. Nancy told the police that she had seen Bob before work on Monday. He had mentioned wanting to talk to her about something important. According to Nancy, Bob told her he wanted, quote, "a new life away from his family." She explained to the detectives that they were having financial and relationship difficulties and had both agreed to a divorce.
Then he said, "I think we need to talk about going our separate ways." And he was very calm about it. I responded in a way that was probably antagonistic because I said, "I am so ready to do this. Let's just do it."
However, Nancy had to go to work and asked if they could discuss it more later when she got off. When she returned home, Bob was gone, but he had left his car. Nancy suggested he might have gone to see his parents, although she knew he had actually visited them weeks earlier. She gave them her in-law's number, then casually mentioned that his passport and $500 were missing. The police, now more suspicious, asked to take a look around. As the detectives searched the house, Nancy grew increasingly nervous. She repeatedly suggested they should check the basement of the upper deck, mentioning that Bob spent a lot of time there. Her anxiety was obvious as she rushed the detectives, claiming she was late for a meeting with her father. The detectives had noticed something unusual in Nancy's car, a tarp and some cardboard in the back. When they expressed their interest in searching her car, her discomfort only grew. She tried to steer them towards Bob's car instead, but the detectives insisted, saying, "We'd like to check your car." Nancy tried to push the cardboard down over the tarp, explaining that she was moving and that the items were for her new condo. However, the police noticed a smell, and it didn't match anything related to a DIY project. Upon closer inspection, they saw duct tape wrapped around the tarp and spots of blood all over it. Realizing something was seriously wrong, they placed Nancy under arrest. Desperate, Nancy claimed that Bob had been beating her and that she had the bruises to prove it. But the detectives couldn't ask her anything further without reading her rights. As soon as they did, Nancy requested a lawyer and stopped talking. The police began notifying the family, starting with Bob's brother Dennis and then Jeff. Jeff called his brother Greg and left a message saying, "Something's happened at home." When the Dumbleton family heard the news, they were devastated, especially the kids, who had come to see Bob as part of their own family. Julie was relieved that she had found Bob's file folder, labeled Nancy's Crap, the previous week and taken it home with her. She was also glad she had her notebook documenting her experiences with Nancy. The police began their investigation by interviewing Dennis, Bob's brother. Dennis shared that Bob had been planning to file for divorce and that they had discussed his relationship and financial troubles during their visit. They also spoke with Jeff about the last time he'd seen his dad. Meanwhile, everyone was trying to reach Greg, leaving numerous messages on his phone, but he remained out of contact. The police even drove to his apartment near the college, only to find that Greg wasn't there. They finally managed to get a hold of him the next day over the phone. When they broke the news to Greg, he seemed neither surprised nor emotional. Greg told the police he was on his way home from a fishing trip with friends when they finally reached him. During the phone interview, he mentioned that he initially thought the police calls may have been about his mother being killed by his father, not the other way around. This odd reaction puzzled the detectives, as one would expect such a thought to prompt an immediate callback. Greg went on to say that his dad never spent much time at home and had been drinking a lot. He also mentioned that he had suspected some of his mom's bruises weren't from bumping into the furniture as she had claimed. He had an off-and-on relationship with his dad, he said, because his dad seemed to be more interested in the Dumbletons than his own family. The school where Nancy worked as a teacher was in shock upon hearing the news. Nancy was known for being an exceptional teacher, admired for her high standards and attention to detail. She had even received an award for excellence in the classroom. How could this dedicated educator be charged with first-degree premeditated murder? While in custody, Nancy had her bruises photographed to support her claim of self-defense. She alleged that during an argument in the kitchen, Bob had pulled a knife on her and cornered her in the garage. In a panic, she grabbed the first thing she could find, an old axe. Nancy insisted she had blacked out and couldn't recall using a knife. She explained that she cleaned up afterwards because she was in a state of shock. Greg stood firmly beside his mother's version of events, unwavering in his support. He wasn't alone in this. Nancy's father and brother also backed her story, creating a united front. They believed Nancy's account of self-defense and were determined to see her exonerated. However, Jeff wasn't so sure. He had his doubts about the whole situation, and his skepticism created a clear divide within the family. On one side, Greg and Nancy's relatives stood by her, convinced of her innocence. On the other, Jeff found himself questioning the narrative, unable to fully accept his mother's explanation. But Nancy hadn't just spent Mother's Day with Jeff and his wife. She had also made a trip to Home Depot, where she purchased an axe. The store's CCTV footage captured her making the purchase, which raised eyebrows among the investigators. Nancy claimed the axe was for yard work, and she even had the receipt to prove that she had returned it shortly after buying it. The axe she used during the incident was the one that was already in the garage. Nancy insisted that she was just trying to protect herself from Bob, who had a knife. The detectives were left to ponder whether Nancy's actions were premeditated or if she truly acted in self-defense. But additional CCTV footage revealed something shocking. Nancy had made 2 other trips to Home Depot after Mother's Day. During one visit, she bought a tarp, duct tape, bleach, and other cleaning products. The third trip was even more damning. Nancy was caught on camera shoplifting a hatchet and then walking up to customer service with it. She then provided her receipt and asked for a refund. Nancy's story of self-defense was now falling apart. The detectives were faced with a growing pile of evidence that suggested premeditation rather than a spontaneous act of self-defense. The items she purchased and the suspicious behavior caught on camera painted a picture that was hard to ignore. As the investigation progressed, the prosecution built a case around these findings, arguing that Nancy had planned the murder of her husband Bob. They pointed to the timeline of her purchases and the calculated nature of her actions as proof of her intent. Meanwhile, the family remained divided. Greg continued to stand by his mother, convinced of her innocence. Jeff, on the other hand, grew more distant, his doubts solidifying with each new piece of evidence. Greg's jailhouse conversations with his mother sometimes mentioned Jeff, and they talked badly about him, and Nancy did not want to see or talk to Jeff at all. The trial was set to be a dramatic showdown, with both sides preparing to present their version of events. The question remained, would the jury see Nancy as a desperate woman defending herself, or as a cold-blooded killer who meticulously planned her husband's demise? The prosecution in the trial presented shocking photos of Bob, revealing the extent of the violence he had endured. He had been struck 16 times with the hatchet in the head, face, and neck, and stabbed with a pocket knife 21 times. The jury was also shown the CCTV footage that captured Nancy's suspicious activities in that time frame. Witnesses were called to the stand to testify about Bob's character. They described him as the nicest guy ever, someone who didn't deserve such a tragic fate. Their testimonies painted a picture of a kind and gentle man, further discrediting the narrative of self-defense that Nancy had put forward. Julie's testimony was crucial, her written records and timelines proving helpful for the prosecution. Nancy's defense painted a very different picture of Bob. She described him as verbally abusive, constantly calling her derogatory names. Greg supported his mother's claims, stating that he too had been abused by Bob during his childhood. Greg's unwavering support for his mother was evident throughout the trial. Character witnesses were brought in to testify against Bob. Former coworkers and friends described him as having a notorious temper. It was also revealed that Nancy suspected Bob of having an affair with Julie. Nancy felt the Dumbletons were driving a wedge between her and her husband, as well as between Bob and their sons.
Were you having any reaction at all that you had caused Bob's death?
I wanted to die. I didn't want to live anymore.
All right, just take a second.
I wish he had killed me.
Nancy explained that she never filed for a protective order or reported the abuse because she feared it would damage her career and hurt her sons by putting their father in jail. She recounted instances where Bob would push, shove, and throw things at her. She even claimed that Bob had a disturbing habit of wanting to role-play in the bedroom as a baseball coach, which made her extremely uncomfortable. Despite these claims, Nancy's demeanor on the stand didn't resonate with the jury. Her explanations lacked the emotional depth expected from a battered spouse, and she came across as unconvincing and abrasive.
So you saw the picture and how much tape there was.
Yes.
Did you use a whole roll of tape on him or more?
I can't recall. I know it's a lot of tape, but I can't recall.
Nancy was found guilty of first-degree murder and received a life sentence. As expected, appeals were filed. In a surprising turn of events, a judge overturned her conviction in 2010, citing that her defense team hadn't been allowed to fully present the battered spouse syndrome argument. This led to the ordering of a new trial. While awaiting the new trial, Nancy remained in prison. However, another judge issued a stay, halting the entire process. Eventually, a federal appeal to the Sixth Circuit reversed the decision for a new trial, stating that battered spouse syndrome is not recognized as a standalone defense under Michigan law. So, Nancy remains in prison, serving a life sentence. Now 72 years old, she continues to maintain her claim of self-defense, even giving interviews in 2020 to assert her innocence. The judge who presided over her case went as far as petitioning the governor of Michigan to commute her sentence, but that request was denied. What do you think about Nancy's case? Do you believe her claims of self-defense, Or do you think the evidence points to premeditation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories. If you have any case suggestions, feel free to share them with us. Thank you for watching, and remember, every wrinkle tells a story, and in the wrinkles of crime, we find the truth.